For most of their lives, Abby and Brittany Hensel were introduced to the world as a miracle that never stopped moving. Two minds, one body, synchronized so completely that the public often forgot how much effort that harmony required. From the outside, their lives appeared seamless, shared steps, shared smiles, shared success. But what documentaries rarely show is the cost of that synchronization. Every movement required negotiation. Every moment of independence came with compromise. Survival for Abby and Brittany was never passive. It was active, demanding, and constant. From childhood onward, their bodies became a living equation doctors could observe but never fully solve. And for decades, that equation held. The miracle continued. But miracles are not permanent states. They evolve. And when they do, the shift is often quiet, invisible to everyone except the people living inside it. Born on March 7, 1990, in Carver County, Minnesota, Abby and Brittany entered the world under conditions most physicians only read about. Dysphalic parapagus twins, two heads sharing one torso, one bloodstream, and a complex network of organs that defied clean division. Doctors were cautious from the beginning. Survival past infancy was uncertain. Yet against expectations, they grew. And as they grew, the narrative around them solidified. They were not just children. They were symbols, proof that life could persist under extraordinary circumstances. Media appearances followed. Curiosity followed. Admiration followed. What did not follow was a deep understanding of what daily life truly required. Survival became the headline, but it was never the full story. Behind every milestone was vigilance. Behind every achievement was physical strain the public never saw. As Abby and Brittany entered adulthood, something subtle began to change. The body that had carried them reliably through childhood started sending different signals. Pain no longer behaved predictably. Fatigue lingered longer. Recovery slowed. Their shared anatomy, once remarkably stable, began to show the effects of time. What one sister felt, the other might not, at least not in the same way. Sensation, temperature, and endurance varied between them, creating internal differences that required constant attention. Doctors monitored these changes closely, not with alarm but with concern, because aging in a shared body is uncharted territory. There is no precedent, no roadmap. Every year added complexity. Every minor issue carried amplified risk. Still, Abby and Brittany kept moving forward, adjusting quietly, unwilling to let discomfort define them. Then came the moment that changed everything. Not a sudden collapse, not a dramatic emergency, but a medical escalation that could no longer be managed conservatively. Infections increased, treatments multiplied, recovery windows widened. Physicians recognized what was happening. The balance that had sustained Abby and Brittany for decades was shifting. Time had altered the equation. When discussions turned serious, the tone changed. Voices softened. Options narrowed. This was no longer about maintaining comfort. It was about deciding whether intervention was necessary to preserve life itself. And intervention, in their case, carried consequences no one could fully predict. One body, two lives, one irreversible decision. The surgery that followed was not framed as a cure. It was framed as a crossroads. Specialists from multiple disciplines examined risks from every angle: shared circulation, shared organs, asymmetrical strain built over decades. Every factor complicated the outcome. Success was not defined by improvement. It was defined by survival with function. Abby and Brittany understood this better than anyone. Hospitals were familiar spaces to them, but this felt different. This time, there was no returning to normal. Whatever happened next would redefine how they lived. Their parents faced an impossible wait once again, choosing between action and inaction, knowing both carried danger. In the end, the decision was made not for perfection, but for possibility. The operation unfolded in stages, each one requiring reassessment. Time stretched. Outcomes remained uncertain until the very end. When it was over, there was no celebration, only cautious relief. Abby and Brittany had survived, but survival now meant something different. Recovery did not arrive as restoration. It arrived as adaptation. Their body responded unevenly. Strength returned in fragments. Sensation shifted. Endurance had limits it never had before. For the first time in their lives, togetherness required deliberate planning. What had once been instinctive now demanded discussion. Every day became a recalibration. This is where the public began to notice change. Appearances became less frequent. Routines shifted. Online speculation followed quickly. But what outsiders interpreted as distance was, in reality, necessity. Recovery did not move at the same pace for both sisters. One needed rest while the other could function longer. Equality no longer meant sameness. And accepting that truth carried quiet grief, not because their bond weakened, but because it had to change. Living together no longer meant identical rhythms. It meant respecting difference without forcing compromise that could cause harm. Emotionally, this transition was heavier than the physical recovery. Abby and Brittany had spent a lifetime moving in sync. Their resilience was built on coordination. Now, synchronization was no longer guaranteed. That imbalance introduced unfamiliar emotions: guilt, hesitation, restraint. Guilt for slowing down. Guilt for needing more. Guilt for asking the other to wait. Navigating those feelings required a level of emotional maturity most people never reach, even in lifelong partnerships. Trust had to evolve. It was no longer about moving together. It was about allowing difference without resentment. Their teaching careers reflected that shift. They remained dedicated educators, but the pace changed. Energy became something to manage, not assume. Pain management became part of planning. Standing time was calculated. Speech was measured. Students still saw warmth and stability, but behind it was careful conservation. Friends noticed the difference long before the public did. The laughter remained, but caution lived alongside it. Abby and Brittany were no longer proving anything. Survival was no longer performance. It was responsibility. Silence became intentional. Rumors filled the space they refused to explain. But not every chapter needs narration. Privacy became protection. The aftermath of surgery was not something they could articulate while living through it. Their family life adjusted as well. Abby's marriage did not exist outside medical reality, it adapted within it. Love remained present, but practicality led. Planning replaced spontaneity. The future was discussed carefully, not romantically. Stability mattered more than spectacle. There were days when the weight pressed down all at once. Fear of complications, awareness of limits, the understanding that their bodies would never become easier to live in. On those days, silence was not absence. It was endurance. Abby and Brittany were no longer living a story meant to inspire strangers. They were living a life meant to last. Their contribution to medicine did not end with survival. Decades of observation offered rare insight into how a shared body adapts over time. After surgery, that knowledge deepened. Doctors learned how systems compensate, how fatigue reshapes function, how emotional stress feeds physical recovery. Abby and Brittany became valuable not because they defied odds, but because they showed what happens when odds finally demand payment. After the surgery, something subtle but permanent settled into Abby and Brittany's lives: the end of long-term certainty. The future, once cautiously optimistic, became deliberately undefined. Plans that once stretched years ahead were quietly shortened, not out of fear, but out of realism. Goals were no longer measured by ambition, but by sustainability. Teaching still mattered, but only if their bodies could support it without cost. Advanced plans, new milestones, and professional expansions were discussed, then gently set aside. This shift carried its own kind of grief, not the kind that announces itself loudly, but the kind that lingers in small moments. The loss of spontaneous energy. The realization that recovery now demanded patience rather than persistence. The awareness that their bodies would never again feel effortless to inhabit. These acknowledgments were not complaints. They were acts of honesty. By naming what had changed, Abby and Brittany gave themselves permission to adapt without shame. Strength, they learned, no longer meant pushing through pain. Sometimes it meant choosing rest. Sometimes it meant stopping altogether. And in that choice, there was a quieter, deeper resilience taking shape. What has endured through every transformation is Abby and Brittany's refusal to let fear dictate the meaning of their lives. They have never framed their story as tragedy, even when circumstances grew heavier. After the surgery, they stopped speaking in absolutes. No promises, no declarations of triumph. Instead, they embraced a life built on careful decisions and honest limits. Privacy became intentional, not defensive. Silence became a boundary, not a mystery. They chose stability over spectacle, health over expectations, truth over the narratives others wanted to impose. Their courage no longer looked like defiance. It looked like restraint, like listening to their bodies instead of challenging them, like accepting that togetherness does not require symmetry. Their story shifted from being extraordinary to being deeply human, no longer about records or impossibility, but about maintenance, about managing fatigue, about choosing peace over proof. This quieter chapter may not attract the same headlines, but it carries a depth that survival alone never could. Abby and Brittany did not emerge from surgery transformed into symbols or success stories wrapped in inspiration. They emerged human, changed, vulnerable, still deeply connected in ways that defy simple explanation. Survival was never the ending of their journey. It was merely the threshold to a far more complex chapter. One where courage is measured daily, not publicly, where love is expressed through patience rather than performance. Their legacy is no longer defined by how long they have lived against the odds, but by how thoughtfully they continue to live within them. As their lives move forward, shaped by uncertainty and adaptation, their story asks a question that extends beyond medicine or rarity. When life changes without permission, what matters more? Holding tightly to the version of ourselves that once existed, or learning how to live honestly as who we are now? That question has no universal answer. But Abby and Brittany continue to live it, quietly, deliberately, and with a resilience that does not ask to be applauded. If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments. And for more real, human stories that go beyond headlines, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with us.